Hey everyone, so today we're going to be going through a AP Macroeconomics FRQ practice. This one's from the 2023 exam, and this is a super common one. I mean, every single year, one of these sets of FRQs that you see on the exam is going to have a question just like this as one of the short FRQ questions for the macro exam. So this one says, assume that in the country of Zeta, the civilian non-institutional population age 16 and over, so pretty much everyone who can work is a count of 1 million people. The labor force participation rate is 70%. The unemployment rate is 9%, and the natural rate of unemployment is 5%. A says, calculate the number of people in Zeta that are unemployed. Show your work. Okay. So to first calculate the number of people who are unemployed, we need to find the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate, I'm just going to write this as percentage, is pretty much the number of unemployed people you have. If this will let me, right? Number of unemployed people we have over the total number of people in the labor force. So the question becomes, how do you find the number of people in the labor force? Right? So let's see. We have 1 million total people, right, who could work, but not everyone obviously works. It says right here the labor force participation rate is 70%. So we know 70% of that 1 million people participate in the labor force. And so we have a labor force number or count of 700,000. All right. So what do we do with this number? Well, now we need to use the other number given to us, which is the unemployment rate, right? So if you look in our little equation, we know the unemployment rate is equal to the number of unemployed people over the number of people in the labor force. So we know the number of people in the labor force, and now we know the unemployment rate as 9%, which can be rewritten as just 0.9. And so we can see here to find the number of unemployed people, we just do 700,000 times 0.09, which gives us a final value of 63,000 unemployed people in the country of Zeta. Cool. Let's move on. It says B, is the economy of Zeta currently experiencing a recessionary gap, a inflationary gap, or no output gap? It is currently experiencing a recessionary gap because of their unemployment rate. See, their unemployment rate is at 9%. Whereas the natural rate of unemployment is 5%. It's not great. I mean, just because you have 0% unemployment, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. You want a natural rate of unemployment. But in this case, the unemployment rate is 9%. That's greater than 5%. And what that means is your production possibilities is slowed, right? The gross domestic products, the stuff you can actually produce, your potential GDP is going down, right? Because not everyone is working. And so that is a recessionary gap. All right, C says consumer goods and capital goods are produced in the country of Zeta. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the production possibilities curve for Zeta. Indicate a point labeled A that represents the current state of Zeta's economy. So we're going to have our production possibilities curve. And I'm just going to label this what you just call it capital goods. So I just write capital. Imagine that says capital goods. And then this side, we're going to have consumer goods. All right. So for our production possibilities curve, we need to show the idea of trade-offs and scarcity. You have scarce resources and also trade-offs. So if you produce, going down here, I'm going to assume that capital goods and consumer goods use different types of resources. And so increasing opportunity costs. And that was an awful drawing. Let's see if we can do that better. All right, that's the best we're going to do right now. And that's the production possibilities curve. Remember, anything that is on the curve is efficient. Anything inside it is underutilization. Anything outside of it is impossible. So if we're looking at Zeta, we want to indicate the point labeled A that represents the current state of their economy. Well, we already said they were in a recessionary gap, which means their GDP, their production potential, is decreased. Right? If not everybody's working, then you're not fully utilizing all your resources, and therefore their point in the PPC graph must be here inside the point. We'll just call that, not sure why I wrote X. We'll just call a point in there, call that A. All right, D says if some individuals who are counted as unemployed in Zeta stop looking for work, what will happen to each of the following for the labor force participation rate and also the unemployment rate? Okay, so this is interesting because we need to kind of consider how these unemployed people, when they stop looking for work, they are what we become discouraged workers. Now, discouraged workers are interesting because when you're calculating the labor force participation rate, you don't consider them in the labor force anymore, but they're still a part of the total population. And we know the labor force participation rate for this, the equation for that is the total number of people in your labor force. So I'm just going to write labor force number, and then this right here is just like everyone who can work, right? So everyone who can work also includes discouraged people, okay? And that gives us the labor force participation rate. And so this number down here doesn't change. But we know this number right here decreases because people who are unemployed are still a part of the labor force because they're looking for work. But when they become discouraged, they are no longer a part of our labor force. And so, because our denominator stays the same and our numerator decreases, our percentage or labor force participation rate must decrease. All right, so moving on to our last question, we have to determine what happens to the unemployment rate if all the unemployed people in Zeta stop looking for work and become discouraged. So we know from part A that our equation for unemployment rate is the number of unemployed people over the number of people in the labor force, okay? We already determined that the number of people in the labor force is going to decrease by everyone who's unemployed, right? And obviously our number of unemployed people will also decrease by the same amount, okay? So what will happen to the unemployment rate? Well, the unemployment rate will actually decrease. Let's say, for instance, we had 20 unemployed people and, 40 people in the labor force. And instead, so this is a 0.5 or 50% unemployment rate. So let's say 10 of those unemployed people decided to become discouraged. So now we've had 10 unemployed people and 30 people in our labor force. Well, guess what? Now we have a 33% unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate went down. Doesn't necessarily paint a true picture. Our economy isn't doing much better, but the unemployment rate does go down because discouraged workers are not counted in that aspect. All right. So that does it for the video, guys. If you want more FRQ practice, make sure you subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.